Hi, this is Dan Korver, pastor here at Dalton Hill Baptist Church. We're a small Baptist church located in Owasso, Oklahoma. We're small enough to know you, but we're big enough to serve you and for you to serve as well. Our vision is to rescue, restore, and return to service. Rescue a non-believer or a believer who has been hurt or is lost, restoring them to Christ in fellowship with other believers with the desire that they in turn will help others along their way. We've been going through the teachings on Jesus, and last week I said we were going to cover rewards. It was going to take longer than 1 week. If you remember last week, we talked about the promise in Matthew 19, where Jesus said that when Peter says, well, we've given up our homes and we've given up our jobs, and Jesus promises them that they will rule over the 12 tribes of Israel. So there's a promise for what you have, what you're giving up in this life, what you'll gain in the next life. We also saw the path, and remember in Ephesians 2 and verse 8 and 9, why you're saved by faith through with grace, not of works. But in verse 10, we're told that our path then is to do good works, but it's not for salvation, but it's for thankfulness, and we're then being obedient with good works for Him. We also have the perspective that we are doing good works for eternity and not for today. And we also looked at last week basically the possibilities. Am I building on God's foundation, Christ's foundation, or am I building on my own? Do I do things for my glory, wood, hay, and stubble, or do I do things for His glory that we tested with fire and would be rewarded for? So that's what we looked at last week. Today I looked at the second part. We're going to be basically looking at prizes and places and promise and so on. Let me give you some, you've heard of some of these people, but others you may not have. How many of you have heard of Oskar Schindler? Okay, we know about it. In 1993, the Schindler's List, when he was a German industrialist during the World War II, and having Jewish people employed in his factory. And then he saw the plight, and basically he helped to rescue 1,200 Jewish people from it. How many of you ever heard of a man by the name of Nicholas Winton? Nicholas Winton. His family, they were Jewish, German Jews, and they had left earlier and had gone to England, and they changed their name to Winton, and their family came to know Christ. He came to know Christ, and then he went back as a teenager. He was supposed to go on a skiing trip, but a friend invited him to come to Czechoslovakia to see what was going on. So when he got to Czechoslovakia, he saw just the plight that all the Jewish children were in. When he gets back to England, he starts contacting people to adopt them or to do whatever, and he saved 669 Jewish children. But his story was not known. Nobody knew it until his wife found the scrapbook in 1988 up in the attic and brought it down and brought it to the attention of the public. I had the privilege of watching it. One Life is what it's called. But I saw that when he was being honored by the Queen and so on, that so many of those children were able, they're in audience 50 years later, and he came up to thank him personally. But again, nobody knew anything about it. The sad part, the last train, the 9th train, had 250 children on it, and the war started and the border was closed. The time they're trying to bring the next 250 over. But again, Winton, do you think he deserves recognition? Notice he never saw it, it was a scrapbook his wife happened to see with all the children's names and everything else on it. And he used his own money and so on. How many of you ever heard a guy by the name of Gustav Engzel? I'm sure it's mispronounced. He's Swedish. It's interesting that the movie just came out. You can find it on Netflix, called The Swedish Connection. Came out the last couple of weeks. And what it was, and it give you a little of the background, in the 1930s, 195 applicants, Jewish applicants, tried to come over on humanitarian visa, and one person wrote, "That's too large, that's an invasion." 195 people in that many years. In 1938, 10 Jewish medical students asked for medical visas to come over to study, and one writer wrote, "That'll be racial contamination." 10. Well, what happens is this Ingela, he was actually a lawyer, became a judge. In 1938, he basically was given the part of to take over the foreign ministry legal department. Now, if you know anything about Sweden, Sweden stayed neutral. And part of it had to do with World War I. They lost because of the blockades. They almost starved because food couldn't come through. So in 1940, Germany took over Denmark and Germany took over Norway. And basically, the German troops can go through Sweden at any time. And it was specifically said you cannot bring any Jewish Germans can come into Sweden. So what he did, and it's interesting, he lived to be 106, didn't come out. His son is 97 today, and actually they came to him to get a lot of the story because he was alive. But everything had to be done in the house. Nothing could be said outside. Well, what he did then, a Swedish connection, any one Jew in Norway or that were in Denmark, he did everything, searching night and day to find his Swedish connection so that he then could bring them to Sweden. 40,000 he was able to find to get. You think about it. Why have we never heard of him? But how many others do you think have done so many things for our Lord that we will one day hear about if we just wait? So it's interesting. You get a chance, you might look at it. The Swedish Connection, it's out on Netflix. It's an interesting story, just how he used his connections and all the legal parts. And obviously his government was not happy, nor was the German government happy. But he took a great risk to do it. Let's look at the prizes, first of all. Look over in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Prizes that are available to all believers. And as you're looking, I want to make it stated, it's interesting when we look at some of these prizes, they're only mentioned like one time in Scripture. And the reason I think that is because so often when things are happening, God brings up something. Well, this is available. I believe we have a righteous judge. There's going to be a whole lot more crowns than just the 5 mentioned in Scripture. But I have trust in my judge that he will award the crowns to the people that deserve them, and he'll call them by whatever name he decides to give it. But notice the first one is in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 24 to 27. It's called the imperishable crown. And notice, first of all, what you have to do to get it. Verse 24, do you not know, and by the way, the reason this was put here, 1 Corinthians 9, you had the requirements we saw last week. The Iconium Games were there every couple of years. And so when Paul was in Corinth, he saw the athletes that were there. And he saw them competing. So that's what brought about him writing this. Notice what he says, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Notice he speaks to you and I. Run in such a way that you might win. We're all in a race, but how many of us are really wanting to win? I saw so many when Will ran, when he ran the cross country in Broken Arrow, there were so many athletes that were much better so far as athletic ability. But they didn't care. They were there because there was girls there. They didn't practice. They didn't try very hard. And they would both get for the guys and the girls. Notice we're told to run to win. Notice the second thing. You notice verse 25. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive imperishable wreath, you an imperishable. Therefore I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not with beating the air. So notice he had rules you had to abide by. If you broke the rules, that's why you had the judges that were all around. And if you didn't follow the rules, you were disqualified. 1 Corinthians 3, Paul gave us the rules. Doing things for God's glory, not my glory. On God's foundation, not my foundation. So we need to run to win, run according to the rules. And notice in 27, I buffet my body to make it my slave, lest possibly after I preach to others I might myself be disqualified. Run to the finish line. How many Christians do you know that have quit? They've served the Lord well, they've moved on, and then they just quit. Run all the way to the end. That's why Paul writes, I finished the course, I've kept the faith in 2 Timothy chapter 4. So the first one, the imperishable crown. Are you in the race, and how hard are you running? Are you running it like we should to get an imperishable? Abiding by the rules. The second crown, you notice these are all very familiar. I really want to get to something else a little bit later. But notice the second crown is in James chapter 1. In James chapter 1, notice in verse 12, and remember he's talking to the Jewish people who are scattered abroad. They're going through a lot of persecution, and that's true today too, isn't it? A lot of it. It says, "Blessed," in verse 12, "is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he'll receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him." So you have the crown of life, but to get it, you have to persevere to the end. And if you love the Lord, if you love me, you will keep and you'll abide in him. So notice we have to persevere how long? To the end of the race, to the end. Crown of life. I think quite often the reason the crown of life, it may cost people their life. But what will you get in eternity? An eternal crown, an imperishable crown. So persevere to the end. So you have an imperishable crown, you have the crown of life. Turn back just a few pages to 2 Timothy chapter 4. Paul's about to be killed, and I already made reference to it. But notice in verse 7 and 8. He says, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the course, I have kept the faith." Quite a statement. "In the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, not only to me, but all those who loved his appearing." Crown of righteousness. Paul's going to get it, but he says, how do you get it? You're longing for his appearing. Okay? The reason I believe it's called the crown of righteousness is, how many of you believe the rapture could occur today? Okay, so if it occurs today, where do you and I go? To the judgment seat of Christ. So if I'm longing for his appearance, I'm saying, Lord, I want you to come because I'm ready to what? I'm ready to be judged. I'm ready to meet you. I have a righteous life. I'm ready to meet you. That's why it's called, I believe, the crown of righteousness. Lord, come. I'm ready. I'm serving you faithfully. Crown of righteousness. But again, it's up to you and I. What are we doing? Are we living a righteous life? And I want him to come and judge. Most of us want to do what? Lord, give me a month or two ahead. Let me know. I'll get my whole house in order. Well, that's not how it works. But the crown of righteousness. You have another one, since we're this close towards the end. Look over in Peter. Let's go back a few to 1 Peter chapter 5. And Peter is writing, and he tells us as an elder to other elders in verse 1 and verse 2. Notice he says, "Shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising authority not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to God, the will of God, not for sordid gain, but with eagerness, nor yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples to the flock. When the chief shepherd appears, you receive the unfading crown of glory." Okay, the shepherd is supposed to serve the flock. And when you're serving people, there isn't a lot of glory in service. When you're serving people. That's why I believe it's called the crown of glory. You don't get glory when you're serving others, but you're promised glory when you're serving others for the right reason. Again, that's out there for us. Why keep pushing on? Why do it voluntarily, not for money, to serve people, so you can receive the crown of glory? Promised. Look at another one. The last one that's specifically mentioned is over in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. So you have the imperishable crown that you and I get for running the race, completing it. The crown of life when we persevere to the end righteously. Crown of righteousness when we are living a righteous life, wanting him to come and ready to meet him. You have the crown of glory for serving people for his glory and not for our own. And then you notice in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, you know the background of the story in the book of Acts. What happened was, you remember when Paul was there, he's run out of town, and basically Jason, remember, is arrested, and basically Paul, in order for Jason to get released, Paul has to promise to leave town and not come back. So notice then, Paul wants to come back to them, but he can't. So they are basically thinking, you really don't care about us, Paul. If you really cared about us, why aren't you here? Why didn't you come back to see us? So you notice in verse 18, "For we wanted to come to you, I, Paul, more than once, yet Satan thwarted us." So notice here what it says. "For who is our hope, our joy, our crown of exaltation?" Is it not even you in the presence of our Lord Jesus at his coming? For you are our crown, our glory. So in other words, he looks out and people say, what do you have to say for your life? By the way, what possessions did Jesus have when he died? But did he serve and do what he should have done? So when they look at Paul, what do you have to show for your life? He stands before, you are my crown, my glory. You are who I have to show. What have I done for you at Thessalonica, at Philippi, and everything else? When I stand before, I get the crown of glory, exaltation, because I served and helped you along your journey. Notice again, what happens if you and I are helping? One planted, another watered. God gives the increase. God notices and will exalt you. So you have these different prizes, and again, we have to wait till eternity to find out all the different ones that you have. But the ones that are specifically mentioned, the imperishable crown, the crown of life, the crown of righteousness, the crown of joy, and then also the crown of glory. But how many of us are pursuing those crowns? How hard do the athletes that we just saw at the Olympics, how hard do they pursue a perishable crown? Who won the gold medal 4 years ago in hockey? I don't know. You notice how fleeting the glory you have on this earth. So fleeting. Let's look at some of the places that you can do it. We have looked at this before, but you don't have to. Well, we can turn to it, Matthew 6. We won't touch on it long, but in Matthew chapter 6, you have private life. Your private life can likewise be rewarded. And oftentimes, as it was in this particular case, the private life became public life. And notice in verse 1 of chapter 6 of Matthew, the Pharisees, beware the practice of your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise you have no reward in heaven. Notice then, they wanted accolades from people today. Notice the three areas. First one was that of giving, almsgiving. They'd walk into the temple and you'd have, for lack of a better term, you might have like a metal container around there, and if you throw the money in, do you drop it in or do you throw it in to where it goes around and makes a lot of noise? So when you throw it, and you remember the widow's mite, God notices. But they're coming in and they're throwing it in there and you hear all this money going around. And boy, all of a sudden somebody turns around and goes, what? Oh boy, Dan, he gave a bunch of money. That sounded like a bunch of, And that's what happens. You'll notice what happened. Did you realize in the temple you actually had what's called the Chamber of Secrets, in which the money that was given in secret, and the money then was taken out of that and went to help the poor. And that is what it's supposed to be. People don't know who gave it, but it's going to help the people. That's why in verse 4 it says, your alms may be in secret. Your Father sees in secret will repay you. Same thing happens in prayers. Are you praying to be noticed in public and everywhere else? Notice in verse 6, pray in secret, you will be rewarded. What happens when you fast? How many people are fasting? You ever notice when people are on a diet or anything else, they want to make sure that everybody knows they're on a diet and how unhappy they are that they're on a diet. Notice they were fasting that way. Notice he says, when you fast in secret. You're fasting because you're praying for something or whatever it might be. You're taking that time to be used with the Lord. Notice he'll repay you. Each time you do it for the accolades of God in private, and giving in private, praying in private, and fasting in private, he will see it and he'll repay you. But most of the things that are done today, we desire the accolades of people. And therefore we get the praise. But that's as far as it goes. Your private life. And I think it's interesting, in Galatians 1 and verse 12, what did Paul say? If I desired the praise of men, I would no longer, well, let's just look at it, because I think it's one, let me give you two from Paul, because I think it's one that I think, if you haven't memorized, or at least basically do a paraphrase of it, I think it really fits well. Galatians 1 and verse 10. Notice a change in Paul's life. For am I now seeking the favor of men or of God? Or am I striving to please men? Good question to ask. If I were still striving to please men, I wouldn't be a bondservant of Christ. So did Paul originally try to please men? Bondservant is where you get the word under oarsman. Under oarsmen in the galley ships, they were underneath and they were in the oars to make things. So when the ship's moving, they're rowing. What kind of credit do you get when you're underneath rowing and being a servant? No, nobody knows it. They just know what the ship's where it's moving and where it's going. Paul says, I am an under oarsman for Christ. There's no glory down there, but I'm serving him. He had a change in his mentality. Go over then, it's not on there, but look over in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and see where Paul ends up. Just before his death, 2 Timothy 1 and verse 12. So Galatians 1:12 and 2 Timothy 1:12. We'll look in verse 11. Paul's about to die. For which I was appointed a preacher, an apostle, and a teacher. Any one of those would be hard enough, wouldn't it? Notice what he says. For this reason I also suffer these things, but I am not ashamed. For I know whom I believe and am convinced. And notice what's he convinced of? That he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him until that day. Paul has made deposits. I have lived for eternity, the line and not the dot, and I've entrusted it to him. I have nothing to show for my life, humanly speaking, but I've entrusted all of the things that I've deposited in his bank. He's going to reward me. That's where we need to get. So notice you had personal life. Let's look at our public life. Turn over to, let's just do Ephesians. It's both in Ephesians and Colossians both. So look over in Ephesians for a minute, chapter 6. Notice in verse 5. Notice it says, verse 5 down to verse 9, Slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and sincerity of heart as to Christ, not by way of eye service as men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will render service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, this he'll receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free. And masters do the same thing to them, giving up threatening, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there's no partiality with him. What about work? Whether you are a boss or you're a worker, how many of us are doing it unto the Lord? He will repay it. How many people work real well when the boss is looking? You ever wonder what it would be like if every Christian would take this to heart and would truly serve the Lord all the time at their job? What type of impact would that make on the workforce? A good example of that happened, I'll never forget, in 1975. I needed a job. The one I had fell through. I was in Birmingham and I was going to school and I needed some money. So I go to apply at UPS, and UPS had what's called a reload. Reload is when all the brown trucks come in at night. All the packages they pick up, they then have to unload them, sort them, and put them on the semi-trucks to go to what was called hubs. In Birmingham, we went to either Montgomery, Atlanta, or Nashville. And so we'd have to unload them, and then we'd send them out. There was anywhere from 16 to 20 of us. I went to Southeastern. Like I said, the largest enrollment they had was 300 students. City of Birmingham, you had UAB, you had Birmingham Southern, you had a lot of colleges there. So I go to interview, and the guy looked at me and he said, well, he had a stack of applicants. He said, well, I'm really supposed to go take these first and go through them. But he said, because of your school, we have 3 guys here. We've had somebody from your school work, and every single one of them have been a fantastic worker over the years. If we hire you and I bypass this, are you going to be a worker to work like they did? I thought, boy, you're talking about a testimony for the school. But that should be for all of us. And they went ahead and hired me, and I worked there for 4 years, put myself through college, and so on. But again, that should be true on anywhere we go. Whatever job you have, whether they are looking or they're not. What happens when I go to mow a yard, or they're gone for, I had some gone for 2 months, gone down to Florida. Do they know if I do the yard or not? I could do the front yard and skip the back, right? God sees it. I'll never forget a chemical company came to spray one of the customers' yards at. When they get to the backyard, they did a figure 8 and left. Well, the thing that's not very intelligent, how do you think the grass turned out? He had a figure 8. They didn't think too far ahead, and obviously they got caught for it. One of them wrote aloha in my neighbor when I was mowing. Seriously, 33rd and Utica. Drive down Utica and you saw aloha across the front yard. Real nice, dark, deep green. Didn't think too well, did we? But stop and think about it. In my work, am I really serving the Lord where I work? Notice that's what we need to do. Let's look at what about you ever stop and realize your church life is infected too? 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 7, it says He's given every one of us a spiritual gift for the common good of each other. So he's thinking about it with talking about the human body. Usually we'll talk about the hand, the foot, and so on. You don't think the toe is very important until you break one of them. And it's amazing walking around and what's wrong with my little toe? Well, that's pretty small, but you break it, you'll know. Some of you have had hammer toe and have had the surgery, and it's amazing. But do we realize our church life, we all have a spiritual gift. If I'm not using it, you realize I'm going to be giving account for what He's given me. And so when we think about it, it'd be your church life, my spiritual gift. You have, you remember in Luke 14, it was interesting, it told to serve those who cannot repay you. How many times do people serve because it's a stepping stone? This happened when I was been at the refinery. They found I was in the environmental department. So when I needed something done, at first they thought I was important. And I could really help them. They soon realized that Dan has no authority over anybody. So when I first would ask for stuff, boy, they immediately helped. Then all of a sudden you go to ask him, it's like, well, he's never going to pay me back so far as helping me down the road because he can't do something. Notice, though, we're told to serve those who cannot repay us. Usually we want to serve people because we want what? I'm helping you because I'm expecting what? I'm going to help you down the road. You have that of giving, too. Do you realize that? Look over in Galatians 6. It's also in the 2 Corinthians 9. Notice in verse 6 down to 10, it made me listed better in 2 Corinthians, but we're already there. So, let the one who taught the word share all good things with him who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For wherever a man sows, this he will also reap. For the one who sows his own flesh shall reap corruption. The one who sows the Spirit shall in the Spirit reap eternal life. Do not lose heart in doing good, for you in due time you shall reap if you do not grow weary. Okay, so God has given all of us different things. Let's just use the example of grain. You get 50 pounds of seed. You can use it for yourself. You eat it all. But if you want some for next year, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to take it and plant it. And that's the reason why, if you'll notice in Philippians 4, we are real quick to quote Philippians 4:18 or 19. My God shall supply what? Paul gave that statement to the Philippians because they had taken their physical resources and helped Paul. God, therefore, will repay them. In fact, in Ephesians, it says if you're doing that, God will see to it you have enough to meet the deeds or continue to do good works. How He does it, He doesn't say. But how many of us are taking the physical means that God has given us, realizing He gave it to us to begin with, and we're using it then to plant with whatever it might be. And you're doing that with missions and so many other things. So we have a private life God looks at, and every bit of our public life. There isn't one part of our public life that is not being looked at, that God's not looking at. And so I think it's interesting when you look at it. So just in closing, think about it. Or actually you have a couple other, I'll just give them to you. Two promises, one is a promise. Hey, I got 3 minutes, okay? I'm not giving you. Remember the promise that you have. In Revelation 22:12, my reward is with me to render to every man according to what he has done. When Christ comes back, that's the motive and your action. The last one, let's close. I want you to really stop and think real serious on this. Look over in 2 John. How many sermons have you heard on 2 John? One chapter long? Actually only 13 verses. Let's look in verse 8. Something to ponder. Notice John's writing, and he says, watch yourselves, that you might not lose what you've already accomplished, but that you may receive, what's the next word? A full reward. So does that mean you can serve part of the time and get a partial reward? How many of us want to serve all the way to the end and faithfully and rightfully and so on and get a full reward? And again, that's up to you and I. So let's think of some things. Do I desire the accolades of man today, or am I content to wait till eternity? Do I work for my glory or his? Do I work daily knowing that the real boss is watching closely? Or I'm at the refinery, I have nobody watching me, I have a job to do, and they don't know if I'm doing it or not. But I have a boss who sees everything I do. Am I using my spiritual gifts to serve others, or do I use it to serve myself? Am I quick to help those who cannot help, or will never be able to repay me? And think about it. It's interesting, we sang that Great is Thy Faithfulness. I told you who it was written by. Do you realize it was a poem? And William Runyon put it to music. When did it become famous and when did it take off? George Beverly Shea sang it one time to Billy Graham at his concert, at his crusade. And what happened after that? It took off, and it was that crusade after crusade. You never really know when we do things for the Lord when something might take off. We'd love for you to come and visit with us and fellowship with us. We're located at 8263 North Owasso Expressway, which is on the east side of Highway 169 North, between 76th and 86th Street North. We have coffee and fellowship from 8:30 to 9 Sundays, followed by Sunday school for all ages from 9 to 9:45, and our Sunday morning worship service is from 10 to 11. We likewise have a Wednesday night service for all ages from 7 to 8. Now may the Lord of peace himself give you peace at all times, and in every way the Lord be with you all the time.